Welcome to this tutorial. Today we will be looking at making our coin a little bit more aesthetically pleasing to the eye. And of course our coin is actually a square, so that's probably not going to happen. You can do this on another object, so probably in the next video I'll be talking about how to import other assets into your scene and setting them up. So I'm just using a cube because it's nice and simple. You could be doing this on an actual coin model you've made, or maybe something you've downloaded. There are also things in the asset store like gems and packs and stuff like that that are readily available for free or for minimal amounts of money. Alright, so we've got our coin, we've got our cube here sitting next to our player, and it's just got at the moment a box collider on it and our mesh renderer on it. So there's not a lot to our actual box. Of course, when we run into it we get some score, but that's about it. So we're going to need to add some stuff to our box in order to make it a little bit more appealing to the eye. And the biggest thing is we're going to add a script to it so that we can make it do things while our game is running. And in order to do this, we can add components at the moment. Down here on the right hand side in the inspector, we could add a component, we could add a new script to it, and we could give it a name and add it in. But I want to set up where the file goes. So in our assets at the moment, you can see a whole bunch of folders. If you go into these, like the standard assets, there's a heap of folder structure and files, and it's all a little bit higgledy-piggledy. It's up to you how you do file structure, but I'm just going to do something very basic. I'm going to click on the top level, so your assets, and I'm going to right click and I'm going to create a new folder. And my new folder just disappeared on me. There it is. Alright, so my new folder is just here, and I'm able to label it, and I'm going to call this coin. So everything related to the coin is going to go into this folder. And at the moment our folder is empty. So we're going to add a game object. No, we're going to add a game object. No, we're going to add a component. Going to go down to scripts, and we should be able to add a new script. Oop. No, these are all just these are just adding components. No, we don't want to do that. So we're going to right click on this folder and we're going to create a script. Now we're going to create a C# script. So we're writing in C#, and that's the one we want to be able to do. So we're going to call this coin animation. And as you can see, I didn't put any spaces in there. It's better to name your files without spaces. Capitalize each word you type in. So I'm just making a coin, and as you can see, it's automatically sort of popped up Visual Studio. I'm just going to click no to that one because I don't need that. So it's just popped up our Visual Studio. So I'm just going to go back to Unity because I didn't really want that to happen. So I'm just going to go hit open, and as you can see, it's popped me back up, and it's just opened up my coin animation script here, and it's empty. We've got a couple of things preset, so we've just got the standard stuff from Unity for the Unity engine and some of the collections of general stuff that we might need in order to write our basic scripts. We can add things to that, so we can add things like you might need like the controllers for something, or you might need specific inputs. We're not going to need that for this script. After that, you've got your class, which is your coin animation. So that's the class that we've created. That's what this script is based around. And then we've got two functions. We've got a start function. So this one runs at the start of the program. It only runs once, so we can set up any initialization of maybe variables or things like that in there. And then we've got our update, which is the one that runs every frame. So 60 frames per second. It's running 60 times. So, and that's where we're going to be putting a lot of our code. Now, in here, just below our class, we can add variables in. So we can have as many variables as we like. We're only going to be adding them as we need them. Alright, so first thing we're going to be trying to do is trying to get our coin to spin. And we're going to get it to spin on the top axis, so it's actually our let me just check that, better get it right. It's going to be rotating around our y-axis, because as x is across, y is up, and z is depth in this software. Some software are different. X and y can be flipped around. They can be going, one can be going up, one can be going across. Sometimes you have the zx facing up. Depends on the program you're using. That's why I got a little confused there, because Unity is different to other programs I use on a regular basis. So what we're going to do first is we're going to be adding in some variables, and just like we sort of did in our first person controller, we're going to serialize fields, and we could actually copy this because that would be nice and quick. When you're coding, copy paste is your friend, so you don't have to type things out. And let's put a big old space in there when I didn't want it to. Alright, so we're going to serialize some fields, but we're still going to keep them private because we don't want other things to be able to access them. Alright, so the first thing we're going to need is a vector 3, and make sure you got a space. See how the red lines are coming up because I'm not getting it correct. And also we've got a red line under void there because we haven't finished writing this line of code. Once we finish writing this line of code, it will go away. And we're going to call this rotation angle, and that's our variable, rotation angle, and that's a vector 3 because we need to move it in 3-dimensional space. We've got to be able to take into consideration all the angles that we're moving it on. What else are we going to need? We're going to need, so we know which, that's going to hold our rotation of which axis we're rotating around, and then we need how fast we're going to be rotating it. Ooh. And we're going to do another serialized field, so ooh, that did not copy over very well. It's just chucking in return keys, and we're going to turn this into a float. Now what was a float again? Float was a floating point number, so anything like 3.14 or 5.72, it's a number with a decimal point at the end, so it's not a whole number. And we're going to call this one rotation speed. Alright, so there are two variables. So we're just going to save this now, and we're going to go back into our Unity project and have a look at that. I'm just going to zoom in as well because I realized it wasn't zoomed in that far. So just have another little quick read of that. Just make sure you've got that down. Got our two variables. Check that. If you need to, pause the video. Alright, we're going to go back to Unity, and as you can see, it updated this script here, but this script isn't attached to anything at the moment. If I click on my coin, I still don't have anything attached here, so I'm going to add a component now. I'm going to go down to scripts, and we should be able to see it in this list. It's usually alphabetized, and it's coin animation, so we're going to add that script onto here, and as you can see, we've got our two variables here. Excuse me. So at the moment they're set to zeros and the rotation speed set to zeros. If we run this, nothing is going to happen. Nothing's going to happen because we haven't done enough in the coding. Obviously our coin disappears, and obviously it's back when we come back in. So we've got this script, and it doesn't do much at the moment. So I'm just going to set my speed to 10, and let me just check for a minute which angle we need to rotate it in. And if we look at our cube, you can see which one's pointing up. Sometimes not all axes will come in with this axis pointing up. So green axis is your y-axis. So we're going to rotate around the y-axis. We're just going to do that by 10. It's a good starter number. You can muck around with these numbers, change them up to whatever you feel is necessary, but they're the two starter numbers we're going to start with. Alright, we're going to go back into our code and make sure you're in coin animation. And now we're going to go into update. We don't need to do anything in start. It's not too complicated, the code we're writing. So we're just going to look at the rotation. And this is where we're starting to use something called transform. Transform holds three things in it. It holds the position, it holds the rotation, and it holds the scale. And if we want to affect an object in any of these three ways, we have to use transform. So we're going to set transform, and it wants to auto fill it for us. Dot, and we want the rotation, and it's capital R in rotation on this one. And open bracket. So we need to put in a vector 3. And that's what's going to be affected by it. So we have a vector 3. We wrote a vector 3 variable in here, and it's our rotation angle. So we're going to write rotation angle, and as you can see, it's trying to autofill for me. And now, if I just put that in there on its own, yes, it will work. Put a semicolon at the end. Let's see what happens. I actually don't know what's going to happen, so let's find out together. Make sure you saved it. Go back into here, let the spinning wheel go do its thing, and we'll run the program and see what happens. So it is rotating exactly the way we want it to rotate. But at the moment we have no control over anything. If we try and increase the speed, it does nothing. And as you can see, when I was doing that, because the frame rate dropped, the spinning speed dropped. So at the moment it's just purely rotating on whatever the frame rate is, and just rotating it by 10 each time in between each frame. It's not taking into account the time between frames, and it's not taking into consideration anything like a speed that we've set it to rotate at. So now we're going to add that to our code. Let's go back up into our code, and we're going to add some things to this. We're going to times, and in times in programming, we use Shift 8 on the keyboard, which is like a little star sign. And we're going to go our rotation. And then we're also going to times it by one more thing. So timesing it by the rotation speed. It auto-filled on me and I didn't even think to look, and I got it wrong. So that's our variable that we set, and we set it to 10 back in the Unity, and we're going to times it by one more thing. Oh, let's not times it by one more thing. Let's actually run this, see what happens. So the code saves, we don't have any errors. Come back into here. This should be fine. Run it, see what happens. Yeah, it's just spinning away. I wonder if it gets affected by frame drops. Let's go to coin, let's just muck around with the speed. Oh, when we set the speed up, oh, it goes fast. It goes bonkers, and it sort of glitches out, and ooh, that's not good. So we need to set one more thing. So we're going to add one more thing to our code. We're going to times by something called delta time. So we go into the time, which is a special sort of class that gives us some information. We're going to do delta time. This is delta and time with a capital T. Delta time is the amount of time in between each frame. So it's a very small amount, especially if you've got 60 frames per second. It's 1 second divided by 60. So 1 divided by 60, which is a very, very small number. And that just allows us to track if your frames drop, it will have a longer period of time. If your frames are really, really high, have a shorter period of time. So it just takes into account any frame lag or frame drops and that sort of thing. Obviously, it can't contribute for insane drops in frame rate, like 10 frames per second. Obviously, you can see any kind of, it looks like stop motion at 10 frames per second. Actually, I've seen stop motion that's better than 10 frames per second. But now it will just rotate constantly at that speed. No matter if I try and affect it by anything I do here, it will... Ooh, getting some cool effects. So it's not getting affected, and now I can muck around with this and set it to a particular speed that I want it to be at. That's going really fast. Alright, so we might need to turn down how much it turns by. Let's just set that back to 10, and let's see if we can turn it down. So mucking around with those variables, we can get a nice spin speed on it. And that's a little fast. Probably bump that up to 50. Wonder if we can get this to a nice number. Alright, so now we're getting to a nicer number. Whoop, went past. And we're getting it down. So if you want to go nice and slow, like 0.2 is beautiful speed. If we look at that from our player's perspective, it's just spinning nicely there in front of us. Looks really nice, and we can still collide with it, and it's gone. Alright, so we've got rotation. And you can muck around with those settings. So what was it? 0.2 was a nice number. If I run that now, yep, spinning beautifully. Alright, so that was our first aesthetic we added to our coin, spinning. Now, what do we want to add next? We're going to add floating. So we're going to get it to slightly bob up and down. And to do that, we're going to need some more variables. So we're going to go back into our code, and we're going to look at some more variables. So at the moment, we've got our 2 variables, and we're going to need to start adding stuff to that. So what are we going to need? We're going to obviously need a float speed, how fast it travels up and down, and the float rate at which it does that. We're also going to need to see if it is going up or if it's going down, and we're going to need a timer so that we can prevent it from going up forever. So it goes up for a certain amount of time, goes back down for a certain amount of time. Alright, so we're going to have three or four more variables, and yeah, we're probably going to serialize these ones too. Just going to serialize that and make them private, because we don't want them to. If you didn't have the serialize field there, the private wouldn't show up in the editor. So we need to be able to edit these values to get them at the levels that we want them. We're going to make this one a float, because this one is going to be the float speed. Whoop, speed. So need float speed, how fast it travels. We're going to have the next one is we're going to have is whether it's traveling up or not, down. So we're going to have a variable as a boolean. Okay, let's go ahead and add our boolean. So a boolean is a true or false. And I'm just letting the autofill fill some of this in just to make it a little bit faster. Now to get a boolean, we go BOOL, but it actually stands for boolean, but bool. And you can make that into a joke if you like. Going up. And we're going to set that to true to begin with. So we want it to go true first. Ooh, we don't want a minus symbol in there. Oh, can't spell tonight. Alright. That's our second variable. Now we need 2 more variables. We need a float rate and a float timer. So just go ahead and create those. and it'll come apparent in a minute as to what some of these variables do, being a little bit mysterious on what these are, but we will use all of them. Float rate, and last but not least, serialize field, private, float, and float timer. Alright, great. So, we're now going to use these, all these, and it's going to require just a little bit of code. So this is where we did one line to get it to rotate. We're going to be writing a fair few more lines to get it to do what we need it to do. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to first set our float timer to increase over time. Float timer is going to plus equal. Now, plus equal means it's going to add something to this variable onto itself. So it's going to go whatever I am plus something else, and I'm going to put that back on top of that variable. So it's almost like saying this plus that and then stick it back into its own variable. And we're going to go time dot delta time, and just remember that's the amount of time in between each frame. So it's actually the real time of between each frame, so that it's adding just over time, so it's just gradually stepping up. So in 60 frames it would be a second if it was running at 60 frames per second. That's really important. Alright, now we're going to have to create in here a localized variable. And what I mean by localized variable, it only exists when we run the update, and it gets deleted after each update and recreated after each update. So we're actually going to write another variable in here. We're not going to have access to this variable other than in this function. We want a vector 3, and we're going to call it move direction, but we'd just go move di because I don't feel like typing out direction every single time we do this variable. And we're going to set it to a new vector because we need to set it up each time, because just remember I just said it gets deleted and recreated. Alright, now I'm adding some more variables in, and I'll go through them in a minute. And we're adding our float speed, which was a float. Now I also added in these. What are these? These are how we do 0 as a floating point. So 0.0, F stands for float. So it's a floating number and it's 0. That's just how we set it up. And I've got 3 of them, so X, Y, and Z. Z's the one we're going to be affecting. But is it the one we're going to be affecting? That's a good question. Alright, we're going to have to look at that. I feel like it's going to go side to side, not up and down, because I'm pretty sure we're in the Y-axis. But let's give it a try, see if it's the X-axis or the Y-axis. Pretty sure it's the Y-axis. Alright, and we're going to move it. How do we say we move things? Using transform. Dot. Alright, we are moving the position, but we're not going to use it to move the position. We're going to use it translate. So we're not getting a direct move from one point to another point. We're adding on to our position. So translate is like adding, and whatever our vector 3 that we're going to add into here is how much we're moving it by. So if that number is positive, move it forwards. If it's negative, we move backwards. If it's left, we're moving it left. If it's right, we're moving it right. If it's up, we're moving it up. If it's down, we're moving it down. So this is where our local variable which we just created and is what we're going to use. So just remember that our float speed we set up here as a variable, and we'll give it a number in Unity in a minute. So say we give it a number 10. That means we're going to move 10 in in the y-axis, and because it's a positive 10, we're going to move positively in the y-axis by 10, and that's what we're going to go see if we're actually moving it in the right axis. Okay, so we need to head back to Unity, and we're just going to let that load in. So you're spinning wheels down the bottom again, and okay, so now we've got some extra things in here. So at the moment, if we run this code, what does that cube do? Not a huge amount of anything. It rotates a little bit. Let's chuck our rotation speed up a bit more. Alright, so it's rotating. Float time is going up, so that means that bit of code worked. That's good to know. And that's about it. Now, what happens if I increase this? Are we getting any movement? Doesn't appear like we're getting any movement. Alright. Let's crank that up a bit. Doesn't look like we're getting any movement yet. Alright. So maybe we've got the wrong axis, and I got a feeling we do. So let's go back into here, and instead of this one, I'm going to delete that one. So I'm going to put that as my variable as the second one, and we're going to go 0.0f at the end there. Going to save that. So now we've got 0, our float speed 0. We're going to go back into Unity. Alright, going to crank our float speed up to 100. Let's see if we can get a reaction out of the program. Oop, make sure we're on a coin so we can see what's happening. No, we're not really getting anything, are we? Our rotation speed's been affected a little bit. Might bump that up to 2. Ooh, keep clicking off the coin. So there we go, we're rotating, but not much else is happening. Get our coin spinning away, but yeah, looks like so far our code does nothing. And well, we've got to figure out why, don't we? Alright. So this is probably why I should never make videos at this time of night, but did anyone figure out why I wasn't getting any reaction when I ran this when I was changing the float rate? Because float rate was not the variable that we inputted into our direction, was it? It was float speed. So let's go up to float speed and change that. Let's give it a bit of juice. Yep, now we get a reaction out of our program. It just disappeared off the face of the earth really fast. Alright, so what do we need to do? Now, let's see if we can just get a small reaction to occur. There we go. Yep, our cube is floating away. Alright, so float speed. Congratulations. Don't try and change float rate when you're trying to change float speed. So, we don't have to set it very high or very hard. We're talking in the 0.2. We'll make it go up pretty quickly. Yep. Goodbye. Cube. And it's going to keep going up. Why? Because we've got no reason for it to stop going up. So that's what we've got to add in now. So we've got to change it so that if it gets to a certain amount of time, start traveling back down. And we're going to use the float rate of how much it travels up and how much it travels down to do that. Alright. So, float rate. We only want it to float for maybe 1 second until we change. So it goes up for 1 second, comes back down for 1 second, up and down for 1 second. So we're going to set that one now, and then we're going to go back into our code and we're going to add in some code. So we need a couple of if statements. One to say if it's traveling up, if it's gone past the amount of time to start traveling back down, and one to say if it's traveling down then we need to start chopping back up. So, if statement, going up, up. Yep, going up is true. So, in an if statement, when you have a boolean, it can either be true or false. So, if going up is true, and the double and symbol means and another condition has to be true. Float timer, which is our timer that increments over time, is greater than equal to float rate. Oops. Which we set to 1. Alright. Add in squiggly brackets. Now, so this if statement says this is true, and at the moment we set it to true, so it's true, and the timer is greater than our float rate. We set the float rate to 1, its timer starts at 0, so that's not greater than float rate. So this will not occur. This will not trigger this if statement to happen yet until that float rate gets 1 or higher on the float timer. Alright, so but if it does trigger, we want going up equal to false, because we no longer want it to go up. We also want to set our float timer equal to 0, and that means that we reset our timer back to 0 so that we can it can increase again until we get back up to our float rate. And the last thing we need to do is we need to change the direction that our coin, or cube in this case, is traveling. So we're going to go float speed, because that's the speed that we're doing, and we need to make that equal to negative float speed. If you put a negative sign in front of something that's positive, it becomes negative. So that's what we're going to do, and we're going to save that. Might just get rid of this extra line here. There we go. Don't need that. And we're going to go back to our Unity project. And we're going to click on our coin. So it should travel up for 1 second and come back down there. It's going to travel up for 1 second. And it come. Well, look at that. Whoa, that was pretty quick. Let's just zoom out a bit so we can watch our cube. Traveled up for 1 second. Bang. And then it started traveling down, but went through the floor. That's not good. So now we need our second if statement. So just check that yours does that. If it's still going up, just check this formula here, and we're going to add a second one down here. So if it's traveling up and the timer goes off, it does the first if statement. Otherwise, we want another if statement, but we want to go else. So we only want to trigger the other if statement if the first one's not true. We only want one of these to go off, so that's what the else does. Then we write if, I've already written if, and we're going to go a exclamation mark going up. Now in the first one we just said if it's true and this is true, then do this. What this one says is exclamation mark says if it's not true and something else is true, do this. So is false not true? Yes, it is. So that will trigger this if statement. It's a little bit complicated to get your head around, but it's just basically doing the opposite of what we had before. Timer is greater or equal to float rate. That hasn't changed. There's no space there. That hasn't changed. It's the same section up here as it is here. The only thing is we've changed is saying that this is not true or it's true. True, not true. And funnily enough, all the code that we wrote in this one, we're just going to copy it, paste it down here. Now, is that going to work? No. See, this one says false. This is the only thing we need to change. You need to say it's true now. We do want it to go back up. That's it. That's all the code we need. Alright, same again. Just going to get rid of that extra line. Don't need it there. And We're going to run this. Going to wait for it to run, and hopefully it goes up, down, up, down, up, down. Sweet. Alright, so now all it requires is filling with these numbers. So bouncing between, and how fast does it bounce? Alright. So now it's bouncing really fast, so let's put 0.02 in there. Let's go only 0.5. Alright, so now we've got a nice bouncing up and down cube slash coin that rotates. I'm going to leave the video there. We're not going to do scaling on this video. We might leave that for the next one because this one's been a bit of a long video. But hopefully you've got now your coin. So it has a little bit of animation, a little bit of spark to it, and once we do the next video, we'll do some scaling and we'll turn it into a prefab. So that's it for this video. Hope you enjoyed. Just check your code, make sure it's running correctly, and I will just show you that code again. You've got some variables at the top here. Get those ones in, and then in your update, it's going to look something like this. Feel free to pause the video and check that code. Alright, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.